So today is a very perfect topic for this time of year. How to do the impossible. And I think it was Katharine Hepburn that said it actually means I'm possible. So always good to know. Anyway, our speaker today is doing impossible things. I'm going to read this bio that he presented to me. In this far-reaching and visually alluring presentation, Lucid will describe the incredible journey of ARK, A-R-K, an international humanitarian or aid organization that he has created from scratch out of recycled materials that is about to serve its 250th meal in Ukraine just as winter blizzards and widespread power outages hit the country. Lucid grew up in a school bus in Alaska. Dog mushing in Anchorage, homeless at an early age, he traveled the world living with the poorest people, helping them implement the survival solutions that resulted in the creation of this project while he was studying history and anthropology at UAA in Homer. So please give Lucid Wilcox a big hand.
Wow, it's so nice to be back here a year later. And
Good to have you.
How amazing that you all came out in such crazy weather. So Skookums and Don and Bobby, right?
Yeah.
And then, I forget your name?
Phil.
Phil and
Laurel.
Phil and Laurel, and what was your name?
Louis.
All right. And this is my partner, Chloe.
Hi, Chloe.
Hi, Chloe.
I know, you just told everybody how small
And
the
then
group
there's
was.
everyone
And
else.
then
And everybody else that we don't know the names of.
No, it's perfect. It's a perfect.
No, it's all good. Well, the world will be watching. The world
We're-
tunes in.
We are a perfectly perfect audience. I'm happy to have this moment, all of us together. I'm going to talk a little bit about this project, and I guess I'll start out with a little more introduction of my basic how I got to this point. I grew up on a school bus in Alaska in the winter time.
And if you scoot a little bit so we can
Over.
see you. Can we see you? Yes,
yeah,
we
I
can.
think it's
Okay.
in there.
Okay.
I grew up on a school bus here in Alaska and grew up dog mushing and kind of extreme poverty and figuring out basic things, trying to deal with the extreme situations. And then I was homeless at an early age, traveled around the country, delivered my daughter by candlelight at the age of 22. It was just a very creative experience early on, traveling around, and came back to Alaska in 2007 when she was just 3 years old to live in this little log cabin and getting firewood off of the hillside there to cook food on the wood stove and hauling water, and a very humble life growing food and raising chickens and things, and then visualizing just through this time how to be beneficial, how to engage and participate in the world. And during this time there was the refugee crisis in Darfur and Sudan, and I'm visualizing how to build a better kind of refugee camp, like seeing some of the problems, the inherent flaws and instabilities with some of the biggest aid organizations. So in the Kachemak Bay campus in Homer in 2008, I started visualizing how to actually put together a refugee camp like this. And then in 2012, just shipped everything I ever owned down into the United States, shovels and propane tanks, and bought a couple of school buses and just started serving food, really kind of organically from scratch, making as much food as possible at these forest festivals, and bought every teepee off of Craigslist in the Northwest and brought them deep into the woods. And at this point, we were making 120-gallon meals, just all on wood fire. That's my daughter there in the front serving food. We were traveling around the country, coordinating large groups of people, learning how to tap mountain springs, how to filter water, and be able to provide these basic necessities of survival in these really remote locations. So we'd move 20,000 pounds a year into the woods on these wood carts and then cook 1,000 meals at a time, put them back on these carts, and move them down mountain trails to give them out at these forest festivals. Just during this 4 years, this first 4 years, developing the prototype and the idea of how to serve large amounts of food. Until in 2016, and the floods in Baton Rouge, we began doing disaster relief. And this is the first time that we connected the two biggest teepees together to make this 50-foot field tent. Then to Standing Rock, just soon afterwards, we set this whole thing back up, made a kitchen there at Standing Rock. We had brought the self-proclaimed Mardi Gras Indians up from New Orleans, connecting the two ends of the river, and donated all of the teepees that the kitchen had been carrying around the country at that point, and stayed deep into the winter serving food. By the next spring, we'd made this prototype of the stove system, making 150-gallon meals, serving them out. That fall was the biggest flooding event in American history in Houston, and we set up again to do disaster relief. This huge double 4,000 square foot tent, making hundreds of meals a day. We then tore this entire tent down and moved it 100 miles and set it back up in 24 hours while making 600 meals a day. So that in total, in Houston, we made 10,000 meals just in that couple of months for the lowest income communities. We moved the entire thing over across country to the border across from Tijuana to serve the women and children in refugee camps that were coming up through Central America. That was when we finished this prototype tent. This is all made out of recycled materials. This 50-foot wide tent that's sterile and washable enough to be a classroom or a community center or a medical tent, and is entirely wood-fired, heated by wood, and we can cook on wood fire there, purifying water. This complete system, then we moved across country to Reynosa. So that was the culmination, or kind of a quick overview culmination of a long process. It had been about 10 years at that point of just developing the idea, learning how all the systems of how to provide the basic necessities very cheaply in remote locations. And so by getting that ready at that point, once the war started in Ukraine, the whole thing was, the concept had been completed, and we had everything on 2 school buses, all of this gear to respond in the United States. But then once the conflict started in Ukraine, it was the perfect set of conditions where this kitchen could be quite helpful. So I sent myself over there just with a backpack. It took a week to get in there because you can't fly into a war zone. I finally took the train arriving into Ukraine the first time. This was in April, just after the war started. And it was the first day there was missile strikes in Lviv, the border city at that time. So as we're coming in, they announced something over the train in Ukrainian, and everybody fell completely silent and closed all the blinds and turned off all of the lights. And then that's how we rode into Ukraine in the pitch black darkness, in total silence, and arrived in the Ukrainian city of Lviv just weeks after the war started, right after the first missile strikes. So I got off the train in the middle of the night to martial law, air raid sirens, just me in a backpack, and immediately started. Lviv was this primary humanitarian corridor. It was the place where everyone needed to leave the country. So that's the place I began building this kitchen, this time completely from scratch. Rather than having all of this gear, I had to translate all of the languages. I didn't speak the languages, so I had to find translators. I didn't have very much money, so I was making everything out of recycled materials. This is old drilling equipment, and entirely to cook on wood stoves. So then I had to come back and forth, flying back to the United States, working every day that year, designing the blueprints to be able to make the tent again completely from scratch on the opposite side of the world, be able to set it up very quickly in this war zone, flying back and forth to Ukraine, this time with a friend, getting all of the necessary equipment together to be able to put up the entire structure with only people power and pulleys. There was missile strikes near the kitchen. Occasionally, they take out power infrastructure primarily. They also take out the military targets. But it was a huge process over this almost year, over this 11 months, to build this entire facility, to be able to put the tent together and get it ready to serve food. In that time, we incorporated as a nonprofit in November, and by this point, something like 100 people had come together to help with this effort that started with just my backpack. At the end of that year, my mother died. So I buried her by candlelight under the full moon and got back on the plane and flew back to Ukraine for the 4th time after an entire year of going back and forth to Ukraine and finally to try to get this kitchen put together. It had been 400 days approximately of working on all of the blueprints, on all of the designs, on the coordination, on the fundraising. And so I was going to take 2 weeks off with my daughter. My daughter had just turned 18 at this point. She had grown up with this kitchen. She had spent her whole life watching this thing come to fruition. So at this point in Ukraine, I was just about to leave. It was the middle of winter. There's no power, so I'm staying in a hostel, but there's no electricity, there's no utilities. It's cold, you have to have a headlamp on around your neck. You have to have a coat on wherever you go. And you go outside into the city, there's no power in the entire city each day, walking from this hostel to the kitchen to be able to put it together. You can see there's just a couple of oil lamps in the windows. The buses were the primary light of the city at night. And I'd been, after this year, snow is still just blowing into the kitchen. It's still a long process to be able to get it to cook food. It was still just a construction zone. Lots of energy still needed to be put into getting it ready. So I met my daughter in Turkey. I was going to take 2 weeks off from this project I'd been working on for 400 days straight. So I met her there on February 6th. We were going to go see the ancient ruins, and February 6th was the day of the largest earthquake in recorded history in Turkey. So we showed up there on the full moon on the day of the largest earthquake that devastated the southern region, and the southern region was where 4 million refugees had been living. So we went to the Üsküdar, to the capital of this relief effort, primarily for me so that I could meet young people, because the very little English was spoken in Turkey, and I needed to find people to be able to translate conversations so he could make phone calls down into the epicenter of Gaziantep, right on the Syrian border across from Damascus. So we isolated the region that would be possible to build these kitchens in, and within a few days had traveled down to this region on the Syrian border. So after 400 days of preparing this kitchen in Ukraine, it still hadn't quite gotten put together, and all of a sudden me and my daughter are on the border of Syria. This is in the center of Gaziantep on the southern side of Gork. It's a giant pendulum. There was a monument that swung violently on that day, smashing in between those pillars, just adjacent to the castle of Gaziantep that had stood for 2,000 years only to be substantially damaged on the day of the earthquakes, just a testament to how powerful those earthquakes were. But the tents were the most evident demonstration. Dentists and lawyers and doctors one day living under tarp tents the next. Their children in the streets collecting plastic to cook rice. Professionals living in apartments on one day and then cooking rice on plastic fires the next. It was a tremendous devastation to hit this area all at once. But I was there to produce this kitchen, building it simultaneously as building this other kitchen completely from scratch in Ukraine, now in Turkey, now in a different language, now with a different currency. This has happened to be the production center of stainless steel kitchen equipment so that I could obtain all of the necessary cooking gear. And found a place to a refrigeration company that was able to put together the frame of the tent very quickly. It was a tremendous process, not just to live there, but to make the whole kitchen from scratch in 2 different countries, one in a war zone, one in the epicenter of an earthquake on either side of the Black Sea simultaneously. This is the facility where we ended up making the cover of the tent. It was chosen because it was the only building still standing. But then I flew back to Ukraine to get there just in time for the for the 1-year anniversary of the beginning of the war on February 24th. And just after that, on March 8th, the entire kitchen was completed. We brought in refugees and local women from the area to cook food. We were making 1,000 meals a day. We started off making 1,000 meals a day on March 8th of 2023, after a year of work getting it put together, starting to serve the women and children living, the 100 women and children living in the shelter on the property initially, and then distributing the rest of the food to other shelters and the train station around the city. Because this kitchen is cooking on wood fire, it's often the only kitchen able to serve food in this war zone when missile strikes take out the utility infrastructure and the biggest aid organizations are unable to. So it was this kind of tremendous completion to be able to get this kitchen going while building this other one in Turkey after this year of effort and a decade of preparation. But it's the day after getting that kitchen going in Ukraine, I got on the train and went back out to Poland and flew back down to the Syrian border to begin building the kitchen simultaneously in Turkey. This is Kahramanmaraş, in the mountains directly at the epicenter of the earthquake. The earthquake destroyed something like 100,000 buildings. It killed something like 50,000 people all in one night. It was an area of devastation the size of England. It was a tremendous impact in the particular place where there was more refugees than anywhere else in the world. 4 million refugees were already living in this place. When I first went back down to Kahramanmaraş, just the day after getting the kitchen going in Ukraine, living in a mosque, eventually moved into one of the tent camps on the border with my daughter. This is during Ramadan, so everyone is fasting during the day, and then at night we are eating bread and rice and olives and cheese together in the tents in the refugee camp. I expected to have this experience with my daughter Karma going to ancient ruins, and instead we were living in modern ruins, and it became an even more intense experience. So in building these, and showing you kind of the demonstration of how this all came together, from the vision to the prototype of serving forest festivals to building these kitchens from scratch on the opposite side of the world, you can see that they're meant to be radically sustainable in the sense that perhaps they can be sustained. You can cook food and purify water, and in the case of Ukraine, heat the whole thing in a blizzard just with any available flammable material. But they're also sustainable in the sense that they're made almost entirely out of locally sourced, easily available recycled materials. Because when there's missile strikes on the energy infrastructure, there's also no water. The pumps don't work, the municipal water doesn't work. So we also store water, we filter it, we process it. We're able to function when these other aid organizations are not. It's radically efficient in many ways. It hires local women refugees to work in the kitchen. We buy all of the materials, we build it in the area, so it's an aid project before it ever serves its first meal. One of the best demonstrations of the efficiency, as I showed you, the whole thing can be put up by hand with only people power and pulleys. We can move the whole thing into a very remote, devastated location and set it up very quickly to provide basic necessities in the most difficult situations. But the best demonstration of our efficiency is that we're making about 130,000 meals a year at about 33 cents per meal, which is dozens of times cheaper than the largest organizations in the world. All of these aspects of our sustainability come together to make it an incredibly efficient organization. But it's also, as you can see in the efficiency, incredibly transparent. So we're making it, no matter how you break it down, even while we moved the entire kitchen across the city of Lviv, we were still making food at 99 cents a meal, and most of our cost was going into the dismantling and setting back up of the kitchen. But on average, our costs are about 38 cents per meal. You can see that it's also a radically transparent organization. Financially, it shows every single expense. Unlike the largest and most successful organizations in the world that barely try to explain what they're doing with the money, we break down exactly how every dollar of every donation is used. You can see even here, the 2003-15 that was sent to Ukraine corresponds to the date so that it can all be tracked. Everything is perfectly transparent in how it's shown. This is the spreadsheet of the expenses in Ukraine spent by the kitchen manager that correspond to every single receipt in the organization. So every receipt, these in this case in Ukrainian hryvnias, along with the date that it was posted, and then corresponding to the USD amount, the location that it was spent at, and the person that posted it, all of the information about every expense. It's the thing that you would expect of a humanitarian organization. This is the only organization, the only humanitarian organization that does this. We've pioneered this method of radical financial transparency, showing you exactly what happens with every dollar. But also all of the meals, because it's you can look at the World Central Kitchen or Red Cross. They have no idea how much food they're serving, so you have no way of even calculating their cost per meal. We show you exactly where the food is going every day, in what quantity, who posted it, who delivered it. It's a radically transparent organization. Part of this idea is it's meant to remedy some of the systemic flaws inherent in humanitarian aid. This project isn't just providing basic necessities, it's trying to improve upon the model of humanitarian aid. So this figure of about 38 cents per meal, something like 3 meals per dollar, in context, World Central Kitchen, they make about $1.5 million a day in donations. They're making their meals often at about $10 per meal. But there's like cascading other problems associated with just giving a restaurant a flat amount of money to produce food. There's not necessarily an incentive for the food to be a large meal or nourishing or to make it to its final destination. They're often incentivized to just make the greatest number of small portions, but then also they don't own the means of production at the end. They just are renting an already existing restaurant for a very high price. So we're making meals dozens of times cheaper per meal. We're making bigger and better and more nutritious meals. And at the end of the conflict, at the end of the event, we can move the entire means of production to a new location. Just for contrast, the largest humanitarian aid organization on earth, the World Food Program, they're saying that they're making meals at 50 cents a piece, but as you see at the bottom, it's a box of food. They're providing a raw box of food, which is the raw materials that we get from the market in a van, and then cook into a hot meal and deliver to a shelter cheaper than an aid organization that makes $38 million a day in donations. So you can see that if you can provide the basic necessities in the most difficult situations, food, water, shelter, medical, sanitation, in the most difficult situations in the world, that is the base layer of every other aid organization. If you can do that in a radically transparent, efficient, and sustainable manner, we can plant 1 million trees because you just have to be able to support 1,000 people to be in a remote location. We can coordinate volunteers to build a school or a well. We can conduct field medical facilities and so forth. We can do just about every other kind of humanitarian project by really perfecting this base layer of remedying some of these systemic flaws in humanitarian aid and being able to do it in this robust fashion. So these kinds of kitchens that can be made from scratch all over the world can then scale up to provide other services. This is our current facility in Lviv. We moved it across the entire city. We're set up on the edge of a forest, so we'll be able to get firewood going through the winter. Our facility has been recreated and is back up to serving 1,000 meals a day. This 1,000 meals a day is the least efficient our kitchen can possibly be. The 38 cents a meal is the least efficient that we can make this kitchen because I've been trying to send the least amount of money there that I possibly can because I'm often sending my personal electric bill or my living expenses to keep the kitchen going when there are not donations sufficient. So I need to send the least amount there that I can so that we don't have to fire the crew. If I was to send about 50% more money, we'd be able to make about 2.5 times more food per day, and the cost per meal would go down to about 20 cents. So it's this balancing of prioritizing keeping it open versus efficiency. So even at our radically efficient current moment, we could vastly improve with a little expansion. We're still delivering this food. We've procured our own vehicle. We're taking it to shelters all over Lviv. We're one of the last major humanitarian kitchens that's still focusing on this primary humanitarian bottleneck. We set up often at the train station for the families that are fleeing the country, leaving the front lines, and in some cases for the people that are coming back into the country. Because if there's a negotiated settlement, people will have to flee the 4 eastern oblasts, and many of them will move to Lviv, and millions of people will still be coming back into Ukraine from the rest of Europe. In the future, we're moving all of that gear that you had seen previously in Tijuana that had been developed on the border of Tijuana to feed the women and children in shelters there. We're moving that all down to the southern border on Tapachula because it's the bottleneck of the humanitarian corridor in the Western Hemisphere. A third of all of the refugees in the Western Hemisphere are in Tapachula. So moving forward, in Turkey, in Central America, and in Ukraine, we are setting up these kitchens to be able to provide these basic services. But then in building these kitchens, we've made the manufacturing capacity to build additional tents and additional facilities very quickly. So beginning in Turkey and Central America, we're going to connect multiple tents together. There will be services, medical services and community services according to what's necessary in those areas. There can be sanitation, there can be emergency housing. So we can expand to provide a range of services in each place. But by setting up in Turkey, in Ukraine, and in Central America and being able to make additional kitchens, we can move them around Central America very quickly and use the administrative capacity set up in each of those places. We can move them from Turkey down into Syria and Lebanon very easily. And in Ukraine, if this conflict expands to the Baltics or other regions of the Black Sea coast, we are set up to make these kitchens about one per month and move them into other areas. So it's a really fertile concept for scalability and further expansion. It's a thing that we're moving towards in the future. So the idea is that there are key actions that you can do, even starting with very little resources, just inherently each one of us have this ability to, with all of our actions and our inactions, all of our words and our silences, we're creating these waves that move out, whether we want them to or not, and are changing the world in a way that these key uses of our attention and our focus and our empathy move outwards and can change the world very consequently, so that starting with almost nothing, we can end up doing nearly impossible things. So this kitchen is, I hope that you will pay attention to what we're doing over the coming years. Maybe I'll pass a email sheet around, and we have our newsletter is the best way that we kind of let people know what we're up to and where we're moving into. We're in this next month setting up the kitchen down in Central America, but I try to keep behind the scenes, on the ground visualizations of what's happening in each of these places, so that you can kind of know what's really happening in Ukraine or what's really happening in Central America, and following along with what we do. And I really appreciate that you would invite us to come here and kind of talk about this project. And it's amazing to be here a year later and to see your warm faces again. And I look forward to coming back in the future to your new locations.
Are you taking questions and answers?
Sure, I'd love to, yeah.
I have some questions on the construction. So, what's the material of is that like a canvas?
Yeah, it can be a marine canvas or hemp. It depends on the location, really, because different parts of the world we're able to use different kinds of materials based on what's locally sourced. Generally, the frame is made out of drilling equipment because there's a very similar recycled pipes all over the world.
So you're just finding that in the area that you're at, and so it looks like a contiguous piece, though. Are they sewn together, or are they?
Yeah, the cover goes up in 3 pieces, and it's raised by pulleys and then is kind of laced together. But you saw at the very beginning the one made in Tijuana that we're sending down to Tapachula. That's all lodgepole pine, so that's all made out of wood, because lodgepole was quite abundant in that part of the United States, whereas in other parts of the world the drilling equipment is more prevalent.
And as you're moving it around, you've got these long poles. How do you disassemble them, or do you just transport the whole pole on a train?
Yeah, the pole is about 36 feet long, and the drilling equipment, it unscrews in the middle.
Oh, okay.
So it can be transported in these 16-foot sections or 17-foot sections, depending on the size of the tent. And then the same thing with the lodgepole pine. It has a socket that goes together in the center, so it's small enough to be transported on the roof of a truck even, but we generally move them in buses.
So if you're in a war zone and you've got planes flying over, is this less likely to be seen? It's white, now, I'm not gonna see it much in the snow, I guess, but, is there something about the construction that makes it more camouflage that
Yeah, so it's white primarily just to let light in,
I
so
see?
that we don't need to have additional lighting. So it just makes it really warm and kind of beautiful and fun to be in the daytime. So it doesn't need to be lit, but it's very unlikely to be hit in these situations. The missiles are targeting power stations and military bases, and we're set up on the property of a Catholic church in Ukraine, and Russia has a particular interest in not being perceived as attacking religious institutions. So there's an added layer of kind of unlikelihood that the kitchen would incur problem. Yes.
So, Lucas, how many people are on the team worldwide? I mean, how do you, and then what is your particular role now in it? Because it sounds like there's a lot of details here.
Yeah, I guess there's maybe several people in Homer that work on the project together in a different period of time. In Ukraine, there's several people who work on the project, generally women, refugees, people who have fled to the country, and they're making a $20 to $30 a day wage for their effort, which is a high wage even pre-war in Ukraine. And then in Mexico, there's several people that we are corresponding with that are preparing to set up the new facility, and then several people in the lower 48. So it's kind of a distributed group of people, and we communicate over the internet.
How do you connect with all of them? I mean, how do you go into a new area?
Oh.
You're doing the connection, right?
Yeah,
You just start going to like a prime organization that might be.
yeah, it's interesting. It's different in each place, but it really is a particular craft to find the right people who are interested in producing kind of a humanitarian kitchen. And kind of along those lines, it's amazing to go into these difficult and devastated situations and find these amazing people that are doing these really incredible things and having a good experience producing solutions and helping their community. So it's kind of counterintuitive that you go to the most difficult places in the world and just find the most amazing people having incredible experiences together and being beneficial in their areas. Yes.
Well, I think the work that you're doing is lovely, and
Aw.
it's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again as well.
And my burning question is, you're serving all these people in Ukraine and Syria and Turkey and Mexico. 1 in every 10 children are food insecure in our country.
Mm.
Can you set up a kitchen here? When you look at what's happening in North Carolina and Tampa, Florida, and people, they still haven't recovered from Michael and all the fires. Like, people are starving here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do something? Why is it not being done in America?
Yeah, so I'd started doing disaster relief for a few years here in the United States to kind of get the thing put together, and primarily after hurricanes, because they're kind of a predictable time frame and it's the most devastation in the area. And even in the case of a hurricane that destroys a city, kind of counterintuitively, it's really difficult to give out 1,000 meals in any one location. The distribution ends up being super difficult, so that it was very hard for us to get over the 700 meals a day mark, and the distribution was most of the effort and most of the cost, and we're trying to find these neighborhoods. So like in Houston, we set up in the lowest income communities for the people who probably needed help before the hurricanes struck. And even so, the distribution becomes incredibly difficult. And then also we're kind of at odds with like the law enforcement and competing with the Red Cross. And there's all of these complications that makes it incredibly difficult, because there's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, there's the Salvation Army, there's all of these organizations and bureaucracy and legal problems where not only is it almost impossible even after a tornado or a fire to find one place where 1,000 people need food, but then it's very difficult to deal with all the legal challenges. Whereas there's these other places in the world where millions of people need food all in one location, and there's none of those barriers to a very small organization that doesn't have like the legal structure to be able to kind
Probably
of combat
somebody's
some of
coming
those
in
other
going, well, that's
organizations.
not sanitary, that
Right.
needs to have you need to have a washing station, you
Mm.
need to, I would imagine that there's probably a lot of, America in particular has a lot of rules and regulations about, and we've also heard that FEMA isn't even interested in
Mm.
having people come in and
Right.
really help.
Right,
Mm.
right.
FEMA's
Even
out
in
of money
China.
and they're not helping.
First of all, remind me not to travel with you. Going from missile strikes to earthquakes to hurricanes to floods, it just doesn't sound like fun.
And as soon as we bought our ticket to LA, the fires started.
Yeah.
But here's a suggestion for you. Every major city in the US has a significant homeless problem
Mm-hmm.
that they're pumping millions of dollars into.
Mm-hmm.
Like us here in Anchorage, $330 million in 3 years.
Mm.
You should go to these assemblies and say, we can help you with the homeless problem. We can train the homeless people how to make meals. We can set this up to where they can start feeding themselves, and it'll be a lot cheaper.
Mm.
It'll be really difficult
Mm.
because a lot of the homeless problem is the assembly constructing it so that they can employ their friends to run hotels and kitchens and stuff. But if you just handled the food part of it,
Mm.
you could shame them into it.
Well, I guess along those lines, we're working on trying to approach the Homer Foundation about putting something like this together as disaster preparedness. Because if the existing infrastructure is intact, it's easier to just cook in a soup kitchen. And in general, this is designed for the most difficult situations on the periphery of kind of disasters where there's no infrastructure, there's no utilities, there's no municipal water, there's none of those things, and that's where this project is most applicable.
Yes, but in a city like this, you have all the resources,
Mm.
and the ones that we have right now are costing probably 4 times as much
Mm.
to make a meal as it does you.
Mm.
So
It seems to me that the welcoming in a place like this is much more acceptable than it is
I'm not
in.
talking about
can I-
welcoming,
can
I'm
I
talking
say
about using resources to solve problems at a cheaper cost.
Mm.
One of the things that the focuses of ARC right now is to be making as many meals a day as possible, and part of that is to make sure that ARC can be getting grants. So we're crossing this threshold of being able to be a slightly bigger organization, and so that we have more support and more success and more longevity, and then ARC will be able to branch out into these other things like working in cities, looking around Alaska more and where ARC would be most useful in Alaska. But right now there's this push to be, doing as much as possible with the little that ARC
The
has.
point that I'm trying to make is in the boroughs and the cities and the counties in US, they're literally dumping hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's true. It's true.
And it's there.
Mm.
And if you come in with a new idea that shames them into it,
Mm.
you could be solving problems,
Mm.
making money, and improving the world all in one shot.
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
Also, too, where do you get most of your funding? Chloe mentioned
That's why I
grants,
say
a lot of
that.
grants, and I mean, it takes a lot of administrative things of what you're doing. Is that your job, Chloe?
No, I'm helping, but Lucid does a lot of departments of ARC. But I am helping a lot. We got a grant together, one that we applied for together, and it's like private donations, foundation donations, grants.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was personally funded. I put in all the money for the first 10 years, maybe 90% of the money for the first 10 years, which is, it's like $10,000 a year, even kind of living without running water and raising a daughter. It's fairly easy to save $10,000 a year. And then that's all it takes over the course of 10 years to kind of get it started. And then once it could do the thing that it set out to do, then I started presenting the idea to other people, and other people wanted to help make it happen also. So this past couple of years it's really kind of come to fruition and incorporated and started operating in other countries. Is there any other questions? Yeah.
You know, I like the way you used beer kegs for
Oh,
the giant,
thanks,
for
yeah.
the giant soup pots, and it's because you can find beer kegs all over the planet.
Yeah, right. It's the cheapest stainless steel that you can find.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the fireboxes for each of the soup pots,
Mm.
all funneling into one central exhaust. That's pretty good.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've got something that's reproducible.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
It was a bigger threshold to build the whole thing from scratch in Ukraine and kind of leave all the gear behind and just start over with just the ideas and the blueprints.
He had a question.
Yeah.
First of all, just your whole presentation with the video and everything is
Oh, thanks.
beautiful. You're a great
Yeah.
storyteller and you have a compelling story to tell. Do you guys do social media, like to raise awareness about what you're doing? I
not
missed
really,
your
no.
presentation last year,
Oh.
and I was at an ecstatic dance event,
Hmm.
and somebody was doing, I think, a sound healing, and the proceeds were going
Yeah.
to you guys.
Oh.
And I can't remember what her name is, but she's kind of famous for sound
Just a
bowl.
month ago?
Yeah.
Oh, that was
yeah,
Sean
yeah.
Suk.
That's amazing. Yeah.
No, it was a woman. What was her? Yeah, we went and presented before the sound bath. It was really cool.
Well, I was like, I heard about it, and I was kind of curious, and I was like, this is interesting.
Mm.
And then it just kind of slipped away.
Mm.
And then now you being here, I'm like, oh, that was that thing. I should have gone to that
Aw.
friggin' soup bowl thing. So, a couple of questions. Like, have you looked into that, and is that something that you could use some help with?
Social
Number
media?
one. Yeah,
We.
telling your story, and because your story is so compelling.
Mm.
I mean, I'm like, I want to just like come and, I do want to. I want to ask, how can I help? And I hope you have a good answer. And I think there's a lot of people, just what you're doing. I think all of these ideas are great, but I mean, your mission is filling a void that's so important and unique. And I think there's a big opportunity to tell your story in a bigger way. And I just think that there's so many people, like, I mean, just talking to you guys before, I don't know what to do to help in LA, but I'm just devastated by what's going on, and just like, wow, this is going to really change things. So
Yeah, as far as like how can you help, there's of course donations are very helpful because we're just barely maintaining some of these things. But like participation, the first 4 years of presentations that I gave were all about participation, just trying to encourage people to share this idea with people that they know, because really on social media it's this like 1,000 people will just swipe through it for 1 second, but it's like if you're really interested in the project and you tell one person or two people about it kind of passionately, then that makes a bigger impact really than social media does. The participation of just, there's so many kind of high level things to do that because we've gotten to this point in our lives, we're pretty good at a few things. So many different layers of help are necessary on this project.
Grants and website design and connecting with funders or just groups that would be interested, helping put more presentations. Yeah, we are open and have considered doing more of a social media this year too, but finding other ways to get your videos or your stories out. Yeah.
Can you put your website up there on?
Yeah.
And this will go out to whoever watches it on our Adam Adam YouTube channel. So
Yeah, cool.
Amazing. And I have this this book here. I assume maybe somebody has a pen.
I
or
do,
you
yeah.
probably have a
sure,
pen.
we have okay.
If you write your email down here, we'll put you on the newsletter, and you can kind of stay up to date with what we're doing.
Have you ever been asked to do a TED Talk?
No,
Are you familiar
Not
with
yet.
TED
I
Talk?
am familiar with them, but you know, we have some videos here, so we can share those too. So I'm happy to reach out to media or whatever is necessary to make this kind of work.
A
and move
lot of
forward.
what helps is just connecting with other groups
Yeah.
of people, because
Mhm.
it's so much of it is networking. So if you can think of another group here in Alaska or elsewhere that would be interested, that's helpful.
Do you ever share your presentation with people?
Yeah, I had some on the internet at different times. I have more that I need to post, but yeah, I'm.
Is it on your website where somebody could go to your website, look at your
Yeah, you know what? There's so many videos on the
Try to
website
write
because
clear.
real early
Sometimes they're
on,
really scribbly.
real early
Okay,
on, I
good.
kind of noticed that it was gonna. It was a hard thing to describe. So right from the beginning, I started making videos, and you'll find all kinds of different videos on the website and lots of information in that direction.
Well, let's give him a big hand.
It's so nice to talk
You
to
can
all of
ask us.
you.
Ask us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was